Journalistic memoirs in India are rare, especially the kind that bring alive the era of sending news dispatches by telegrams that use the Morse code. But that era in the late 1960s and 70s had its own romance when news was just news and opinion, well, opinion was left at home by journalists. Reminiscing precisely such a career spanning 50 plus years is the veteran journalist, columnist, and now writer Mahendra Ved. He has just published his memoir at age 75, pithily titled At 75 As I Saw It. Going through a breezily recalled book, it's obvious that Mahendra Ved has seen a lot in his career that saw the extraordinarily unprecedented creation of a nation, namely Bangladesh, violence of war, tumult of an emergency, exuberant electioneering by embattled prime ministers, political assassinations, wrenching industrial disasters, and much more. Ved has reported the news and analyzed it for close to 70% of India's existence as an independent nation state. He spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports about what it means to be an old school print journalist who is not confused between the news and opinion. Mahendra Ved. Welcome to Mayank Chhaya Reports. Mahendra, it's a great pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
We are precisely a month away from the inauguration of the Ram Temple at Ayodhya, expectedly amid unbridled pomp and circumstance. That takes me back to a fascinating story in your book about the late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, Devraha Baba, and the Shilanyas of this, perhaps the very temple that we are talking about. That was in November 1989. I vividly remember Devraha Baba because I used to cover that part of electioneering as well. Let's
Yeah.
start with that interesting foundation laying that you say essentially opened the path for soft Hindutva. Let's begin with that since we are just a month away from that inauguration.
Well, the situation has changed radically, as you can see, from 1989. The dispute went on for very long, also led to the demolition of Babri Masjid. But since then, you see, the court has taken a decision, given its verdict, that the uh, temple site should go to the Hindus, to the organizers, and a separate mosque should be made. So, from the court point of view, it has been settled. The, there is a mosque coming up somewhere else, but temple is almost ready, as you say, and it's going to be inaugurated next month.
I'm fascinated by the story of Devraha Baba and his meeting with Rajiv Gandhi, especially in the context of Shilanyas, which happened in November in 1989, as you write in your book. Let's talk a bit about that because Devraha Baba was a very colorful character. He used to bless his devotees with a soft kick on their head. I
Yeah.
remember those visuals very well. So let's travel back a bit to that meeting between Rajiv Gandhi and Devra Baba, which eventually led to the Shilanyas.
That meeting was reported to have taken place, but people who were around him, they are no more there. They are all gone. So we only have to go by the report of what had happened. And similarly, even Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi's meetings also were top secret, except that there were close aides, political and personal aides. Nobody got to know about it. The whole place used to be sanitized. So it was the case with Rajiv Gandhi also. We have only gone by reports after that Rajiv Gandhi took a decision and uh, the gates were opened.
Give us a broad strokes description of your distinguished 50 plus year old journalistic career.
Well, I am essentially a journalist,
Okay.
but I strayed into different areas because I began as a news agency journalist. And you couldn't say you don't know something. You had to know it or you had to get into it. It was like sinking or swimming. And well, I went to Supreme Court at one end. At one stage, I covered several public inquiries. I covered the war. I covered several. Really. It used to be said from Ikebana to President's House, you are supposed to know, cover everything. Same thing with Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, Parliament. You could afford to say, oh, I don't know the members, I must get familiar and I must get to know people. No such thing. It just happens and you have to do it.
Right.
That's how it was. I went to Bangladesh with barely a dozen words in Bengali language, but then it became a professional necessity, and I embraced it with enthusiasm. And I picked up as much Bangla as I could, to the extent that I could listen to the radio bulletins. I could pick up the headlines. I could even understand the conversation and also get into broken conversation myself. But it was something that I enjoyed doing it. It was a challenge and an opportunity, and I think I managed to do it as well as I could.
Right. Your book is titled At 75 as I Saw It. 50 plus years as a journalist is a very long time, and this represents about 70% of India as an independent nation. Tell me what stands out for which decade stands out for you the most as you look back?
Well, 70s was a very uh, tumultuous time. As you know, the elections came. Mrs. Gandhi won the majority, and I remember on the day the results were coming out, the first wave of refugees from Bangladesh or then East Pakistan arrived the same day. Even that there was no, just Mrs. Gandhi was able to form her government and get into action. The same, I think, if I remember right, was 27th or 28th of March. It had started. So it was tumultuous. The whole 70s was, we ran about, we got things. Uh, then some Pakistani diplomats, Bangladeshi, Bengali diplomats switched sides. We were making rounds of, different embassies. And, suddenly Humayun Rashid Chaudhry was one of the first ones, and he declared his allegiance to Bangladesh. And we rushed to the place where he was, and he declared that it became world news. So we were dealing with world news all along those 8, 9 months. And finally, as you know, the war came. And I must say that war has been, it was more than 50 years ago, but it has impacted my life in a very, very big way. And then it so happened that I got posted to Bangladesh a couple of years later in 74. So although the war itself, I was at the other end of the subcontinent in Jaisalmer, almost
Right.
2,000 kilometers away. But it, fate took me to Bangladesh. 74 was a terrific year there. There was famine, there were floods, there were political upheavals, there were left extremists active, the right extremists also trying to raise their heads. And Sheikh Mujib changed parliament. He declared it became a one-party democracy. Uh, he took over much of the press, and then a few months later came the assassination, 75, uh, August 15. So I have recorded how I reported it. I
Right.
mean, one may think after 50 years, but the very challenge, how I met the challenge, that is my story. And in the
Right.
process, I very nearly got shot at. But
Yeah.
that's a different story.
Yeah. It strikes me, Mahendra, that you were what, barely 27 when you were in Bangladesh?
Uh, I was in Bangladesh 74.
Yeah. So how old were you then?
I was there for about 23, 24 months.
No, how old were you?
How old I was? I was 25.
That's what I'm
I was
saying. At
25.
that age,
Yeah,
at
I
that
was
age, to be
25.
in a country which has just been born amid such spectacular
Yeah.
violence,
Yeah.
it must have been quite a scene for a journalist, isn't that?
And let me add that being a non-Bengali, that itself posed a challenge. But I
Right.
took the plunge and and I found myself in the midst of all the activities, in the midst of, earth-shaking activities, and I delivered to the extent that I could because there was martial law there and emergency at this end.
Right, right. I want to dwell a bit on other aspects of your book. I want to travel back to 1964, where you're
Yes,
talking about a very interesting story of your rather fleeting but memorable encounter with Mountbatten as a naval cadet. Tell me about that. This was in 1964, right?
Uh, Prince Philip, you're talking of?
No, Mountbatten.
Mountbatten. Oh, yes. I was first time visiting Delhi to participate in the Republic Day parade. And one day after the parade, we were all lined up on the lawns of National Defense Academy, National Defense College, NDC, let me correct.
Right.
National Defense College. This is the high level and an international organization. He was supposed to have come to address the delegates, student scholars at that time. We were lined up, and he just got off the car and he took the salute from us, and I happened to be the last guy because I was the tallest. I was the last, and he stopped at only the officer, and then finally, just before leaving, he stopped before me and he asked me, uh, "Where do you come from?" And we were as trained. We were shout back, "I come from Bombay, sir." Now that moment got clicked, and
Right.
I've written about it that I didn't have the money to buy that little photograph, all of 2 rupees. And I begged and borrowed, and finally I got the photograph, which is still one of my treasures.
And you were just 16 years old, right?
Yes, I was still in school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, tell me, how come you did not pursue a career in the Navy?
Well, I have a myopia problem. When I
Oh, I
joined the
see.
Sea Cadet Corps, I was told that why do you want to join? The late Commodore Gokuldas Ahuja. He interviewed me. Why do you want to join? I said I want to join the Navy. And how can you join when you have the glasses? And I said, sir, I'm trying to remove them. I'm trying to improve it. Of course, I don't think he believed me, but he gave me the form and admitted me. And I was one of the many people who had myopia problem. I
I
mean,
see.
who wore glasses. I mean, these days it's not difficult.
Right.
So I did go through a course for training for 7 years there.
You know, as I was reading your book, Mahendra, it also struck me that it's like a series of snapshots of your life. It's like very breezy journey through what you have been through yourself. Was that a conscious choice?
Well, I just went on writing, and then I had some focus on my mind
Hmm.
because the domestic part, my whole basic thing was what how I dealt with a person or how I dealt with a particular situation. That was my focus. I didn't want to go into history. Now, for example, uh, you know there are better people, more people with expertise who will write on a particular subject. I have tried to confine myself to how I dealt with the subject, like
Right.
Operation Blue Star. So much has been written about it. I concentrated on how I reported it. Same way, Parliament, how I saw Parliament. Same
Right.
way, 71 war. I confined myself to the Sindh Rajasthan sector where I was there.
Apart from the 70s, one standout year to me is 1984, and I mean, you know it, but I'll lay it out for my viewers.
Yes.
You're talking about in April 1984, which is April 3rd, 1984, when Rakesh Sharma becomes the first Indian in space and talks to Indira Gandhi, and the famous answer, "Sare jahan se acha Hindustan hamara." We are jumping themes for a deliberate reason. From there, it was followed by, say, sometime in June, the storming of the Golden Temple. That was followed by Indira Gandhi's assassination. It was followed by the Sikh massacre, and finally the dreadful devastation in Bhopal. In a single year, 1984, which is the Orwellian year, all these things happened, and you were reporting all those things. I'm fascinated. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yes, after 71, 84 was the most another tumultuous year. As you have narrated each of these events, they came and went. And the point I made is that Rakesh Sharma feat, Sare Jahan Se Acha, got pushed into sideline because so many tragedies occurred. at that time.
Right.
I mean, uh, unthinkable. And as you said, Bhopal tragedy. And we were already in the midst of election. A new government had taken over. And immediately after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, there were riots against the Sikh community. I mean, we are moving from one crisis to another all through.
And people don't realize how bad 1984 was. Uh, no country could have withstood this level of devastation, uh, but India
Yeah.
did eventually.
Yes. Just as 71 was the refugee crisis, 10 million people coming from across, and it was quite a critical time because India was just not ready. It didn't have the resources for it. In
Right.
the same 84 was, I would say, uh, sadly, much of it was self-made. I mean, we
Right.
self-inflicted wounds, and
Indeed.
they bore it. India sort of, and if you remember, after 84, suddenly, with a younger prime minister, that is Rajiv Gandhi, coming in, a lot of people had a lot of hopes. Late media baron Ramnath Goenka, who was otherwise against Nehru and Indira Gandhi. When he met Rajiv Gandhi, he said, "Now India is in safe hands. I can
Right.
die in peace."
I remember
But
that. Yes.
he turned against because, events overtook his optimism.
Right. I want to go back 14 years from 1984 and go to 1970, and you are watching a movie called Umang on television. And suddenly it is interrupted by a special announcement by Indira Gandhi about the 19th dissolution of parliament, which led to the elections. Try and reminisce a bit about that.
Yeah, uh, it was a Sunday evening, a winter evening, and last day everybody was kind of relaxed. And in those days, you had only Doordarshan, and Sunday movie was a treat. I mean, families got together and watched the film. Very few people had television in the first place. Even
Right.
your neighborhood people would swarm your drawing room.
Hmm.
In that situation, I was watching this film, and Mrs. Gandhi was at the receiving end. Mrs. Gandhi was being criticized, she was being attacked, and she sprang this surprise by announcing election dissolving Lok Sabha. And the same night, she went to the president, delivered resignation, and she asked for the polls. Now, this movie was just one of those situations where you saw interruption one, two, three, and then suddenly there's a standby for an announcement. Another 10 minutes, and people were getting cheesed off because they were enjoying the movie on that evening. Finally, Mrs. Gandhi came, and you saw the whole mystery became. So only radio and TV that evening had that story.
Right.
Rest of the country came to know from radio and from the news agencies that work for you and I. So it is the news agencies that put out the story.
Yeah.
And it
One
was all over
interesting.
by 10:30, if you say.
Huh.
And that's when I went to office and I just put those three paragraphs, two paragraphs, how Mrs. Gandhi made the announcement. Now, in today's thing, it is unthinkable. But in those days, Doordarshan was confined only to Delhi. So from Delhi, how it went out, news.
Right.
Entire country, they had these little two paragraphs of mine that how Mrs. Gandhi made the announcement.
One interesting instance of how a journalist cuts across party lines for you came in 1971 when you were during the parliamentary election soon after that announcement. The people, I'm just enlisting the leaders that you were in touch with on a regular basis. There was IK Gujral and HKL Bhagat from the Congress Party. There was
Yes,
LK Advani from the Janasangh. There was
yes,
Brijmohan Tufan from the Socialist Party, and
yes.
there was Prem Sagar Gupta
Prem
from the
Sagar
Communist
Gupta,
Party of
CPI.
India, which is the
Prem
entire
Sagar.
spectrum of political parties in the country.
You see, in those days, your different parties had, the Delhi level leader, Prem Sagar Gupta was there from CPI. And Mr. Advani was chief of Bharatiya Jansangh in Delhi, Bharatiya Jansangh. He had just been a few months in Rajya Sabha. He was one of the early people I met. So was Mr. HKL Bhagat, one of the general secretaries of the party, Mr. Gujral. So these were the people at that time, and I might add that in that era, there was a lot of shero shairi,
Right.
public speeches, or in parliament, people resorted to shairi. I mean, it was considered the flavor was that. In spite of all the acrimony, there was humor in parliament, outside, there was poetry outside, and I must say it was quite a composite kind of society. Although Delhi was different from other cities, but still being the national capital, it enjoyed a real amalgam of people and languages, and it was also the happening city with so many foreigners coming. It was
Right.
71, the time when so many people came from abroad to have a first-hand knowledge of how the refugees are being looked after. Whatever the policy of Mr. Richard Nixon and Dr. Kissinger, but Mr. Ted Kennedy came. I remember
Right.
uh, so many people. Andre Malraux, he was the French philosopher.
Right.
He blessed India. He had such praise for India. He said India is like the mother. I mean, that was a time when people really, Ravi Shankar, if you recall,
Yes.
the Beatles came in, Yehudi Menuhin came in. So
Yeah.
they performed in the name of Bangladesh. So it is
Right.
not that Indian government of India was fighting for something unjust or something unpopular. Whatever the role of the governments of the day, whether British or American and others, but the public sympathy was very much with India. And those who went to the camps, refugee camps, they really they saw things as happening. And
Right.
they were really appalled. I mean, what difficulty India was going through.
Right. To change gears a bit, Pakistan features quite prominently in your book, and one particular reference that jumped out at me, and the one that old school journalists would remember, is under Ziaul Haq, the Pakistani strongman. There were five hijackings between 1981 and 1984, and
Yes,
all ordered essentially by Zia to
yes.
trouble India. Tell me a bit about it, because people don't even, I think they cannot conceive that a president of a country can carry out hijackings of a neighboring country so frequently, not just once, five times.
You see, I might start by telling you that since Pakistan has been quite constant in my writing, is because when 71 war began, you and I, where I worked, they
Right.
started a Pakistan desk under a senior person called Mr. Samuel Bade,
I
who
remember
knew,
it.
and we monitored Pakistani media. And I sort of, ever since then, so it's more than 50 years, that I've sort of got attuned to. So if I read Times of India, I would also read Dawn, something like that. So coming to Zia, you see, Zia was a PR personified, very charming person. He could invite you, make you a state guest, and serve kebabs with his own hands. I mean, he had done with several journalists, several VIPs. He had hosted them in Islamabad. So he was PR personified, number one. And he was one man who sort of wanted to avenge the loss of East Pakistan. And I must say, he got away quite a bit. Hijacking was one of the many things. He fomented the militancy among the Sikhs. In
Right.
fact, one of the last nail in the coffin so far as Operation Blue Star was, Zia's action uh, was of creating a situation when Bhindranwale took shelter within the Golden Temple. So, he was very smart, the ISI, and if you remember, that was the time the Afghan war was on.
Right.
So the ISI of Pakistan Army was very clear. General Abdul Rahman was there, lieutenant, and followed by General Hamid Gul. And they really worked on both fronts, Afghanistan front and India front. And somewhere in between, the Sikh militants, the Kashmiri militants, they all converged at some places in Pakistan or even went over to Afghanistan. And, their mentors were people like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the Afghan warlord. And they were all, if I may add, they were all favorites of the CIA.
They were,
It was
yes.
CIA's war. Pakistan was the jumping board, and the whole world watched what happened to the 80s.
Uh, India's parliament was your professional watering hole for quite some time. Tell me about it, particularly the majestic central hall that you talk about, and which is now missing from the new parliament building.
Okay, I started covering Parliament a little later, but the first time I went was in '64, if I remember, if I tell you, as a tourist, as a
Right.
cadet I was there. Uh, and I've written that I never thought that some years later I would end up in Delhi as a journalist and report Parliament, and sitting in that very chair, it so happened, or just above the Prime Minister, which is where Hindustan Times, where I worked, also
Right.
had a seat, a permanent seat. So uh, I got introduced to Parliament later, late 70s. I became, well, shall I say, senior enough to report to Parliament. And again, you didn't have a choice. You could go to Lok Sabha, you could go to Rajya Sabha, depending on just pick up your notebook and pencil and rush. And that was really physical reporting of Parliament. I mean, we
Yeah.
took turns and we sort of ran, and we always had that competition with the PTI, and who ran faster and who put out the flag. I mean, that was the early days of Parliament. There was a lot of bonhomie then. Members came up on the first floor, if you know. There was the tea kiosk, and there were the
Yes.
three press rooms. Members of Parliament would come up and sort of be with us. There were informal discussion. Parliament itself was uh, rather educative. Even if you are not on duty, you could sit back, put the earplugs, and listen to a debate which was educative, particularly the question hour.
Right.
Today, that doesn't happen. I have covered several budgets and budget discussion, ministry wise discussion. And there was a time when you could have 7, 8 ministries discussed during the budget session. Today, it went down to one and a half ministry. I'm not very clear about how well it is done these days, but uh, the discussion then, although short, was more meaningful.
Right.
Today, everybody agrees with the government of the day.
No, the like I said, when I look at your span of your work and we compare to the quality of journalism now, I'm somewhat junior to you, but I've seen a lot of the same time frame in my career. There is such a
Yes.
remarkable difference between what it was and what it is now. How do you look at the state of journalism today?
Well, it's much more technical, more technological, more dynamic. And I should say that more educated boys and girls are joining the profession. I've been a media educator, uh, teaching at IIMC for 6 years, Times School of Journalism for 4 years. So I know better educated people are coming. If I can recall what Mr. M.V. Kamath, the doyen, once upon a time, he had done his BSc and he didn't get a job. And so he went to Free Press and he said that, well, he said, I'm not getting any job, so I want to be a journalist. Now, things have improved, have changed very much. People from the larger universities, even foreign educated people, have taken liking to journalism, uh, and it's much more. The salary is much more. I started as a news agency class 7. Now today there are newspapers and all, they pay well, but the thing is that it is a contract, and you
Right.
have to be ready to go home after 2 years or 3 years when the contract ends.
Right.
So uncertainty there. Working hours no longer the old trade union business. There is not there. You could be busy 10 or 12 hours more. I mean, there is no time limit. In any case, our journalism being what it is, I mean, profession, you can't say I'll go home because the event doesn't wait for you. Event can take
Absolutely.
time. So the news can break any time. So we cannot restrict ourselves to any time.
Right.
Things are much different, much more, and there is technology today.
Yeah.
I started like with a Morse code and typewriter. Today you have the cloud and you have the internet and you have so much more.
Right. But don't you worry about the quality that broadcast journalism has lowered to an astonishing extent? I mean, I live 10,000 miles from India, but I do monitor, and it's amazing the debasement of the quality of journalism that's practiced on the broadcast media.
See, it's no more. Sorry, it's no more going to the ground and reporting. That
Right.
doesn't happen much. It is all on telephone, all on internet. You no longer go for the dictionary. You go for Google Guru. Things that changed. Also, uh, ministers and MPs are more communicative because they want to sell their ware.
Right.
They don't want to be left out. Earlier, if you were reporting the cabinet, you would be told it's all very secret and it's classified and all.
Right.
And unless you knew some one minister who would sort of put his trust in you, then you could report to the cabinet. Today, cabinet briefings are there, everything is on the internet, things are much faster, much better.
Right.
But quality is something, I mean, I wouldn't like to say everything from your time and my time were very good and they are
I
no longer
agree.
good. I wouldn't say that.
That's no, that's
Yes,
true. That's true.
the current phase, of course, you see that the media has been, a good deal of media has been purchased by large corporate houses. So that is impacting people. Earlier also there were Lalaji's, corporate uh, owners, but
Right.
media was left to fend for itself. The editor was a good cushion between the management and the journalist, and a good editor managed to sort of manage things in a way that uh, editorial freedom was not curtailed.
Right.
But today that doesn't seem to happen. That's one thing I feel sad about. So, as I said, when we entered the profession, journalism was supposed to be mission because it was inherited from the freedom movement.
Right.
Then it became profession in our time. And now I think it has become industry.